Trump's executive actions. But here's what Congressman Dan Goldman had to say to pop that non-reality.
Colleagues complain about the high number of nationwide injunctions during the first 3 months of this presidency. Well, rather than blame the judges for that, I've got an idea. Stop breaking the law.
There's that. Joining our coverage, former Democratic Senator, MSNBC political analyst Claire McCaskill is here. Andrew's still with us. Claire, your thoughts on everything that's unfolded today, but especially this move by House Republicans who really are operating more like the White House staffers in the Leg Affairs office.
Yeah, they have absolutely no backbone when it comes to oversight of the executive branch. By the way, if they read the Constitution, they would understand that's their job. But they have abdicated that job. They are sleeping dogs with no fight in them unless Donald Trump prods them to do something on his behalf. And I think what's really destructive about this law is that a lot of Americans don't understand really how our courts work. And I hate to do this in front of Andrew because he's probably been in the courtroom maybe even more than I have, and I've been there a lot. But our trial courts are the finders of fact, Nicole. The district courts in the federal level is where you bring evidence in, and a judge decides what evidence is admissible, and either a jury or a judge makes decisions about whether or not witnesses are believable and what law should be applied to those facts. And that is what the trial court does. And you get a remedy at the trial court. The decision is whether you're innocent or guilty, or whether you receive damages or not, or whether you get an injunction to stop activity that the court determines based on the evidence in the law is not allowed. Now, what these guys are saying is we're going to wipe out that level. We're going to immediately take it to the appellate level. Well, how are they going to be the finders of fact? They don't hear evidence. They're not on the front row to hear the witnesses and understand the testimony. So what they're really doing is saying, listen, judges, we're trying to tell you to quit ruling against a president that's acting unlawfully. That's really what they're doing. And shame on them, because their job is they're supposed to be checking the president and the executive branch, not trying to undermine the ability of the only branch left that is willing to try to extract some kind of accountability from this guy.
Well, what's amazing, Claire, is the hypocrisy. I mean, Republicans publicly and privately will tout the great accomplishment of largely remaking the ranks of the federal judiciary. A lot of the judges who over the last 9 years have pumped the brakes on Trump's policies are people who were appointed by Republican presidents, in some cases Trump himself. What is the impact, and both the security impact and the political impact of just chipping away at the integrity and the credibility of federal judges?
Well, I mean, in fairness, the Supreme Court has done a fairly good job of that on its own in terms of chipping away at some of the confidence people have in the Supreme Court with some of the shenanigans of Clarence Thomas and others. But it really does. It is interesting to me because courts have always issued injunctions against presidential action. They did it, I think, dozens of times to Barack Obama. They certainly did it a lot to Joe Biden. Republicans that have been people who've been appointed by Republican presidents and Democratic presidents have both done it. I think the AP case, which basically stood up for the freedom of press in this country, I believe that case was decided by a Trump judge who said, no, Donald Trump, you can't tell the AP they're not allowed in the White House. That isn't how America works. So they need to just realize that if they're not willing to do their job for checks and balances that our founding fathers envisioned, they need to at least let the courts do it.
Andrew?
Well, you're going to see the onslaught that you've seen with respect to prosecutors, with respect to the media, with respect to anybody who has stood up to Donald Trump. You're going to see that onslaught, and the next onslaught is going to be not just the 4 judges who are or I should say the 3 judges overseeing Donald Trump's criminal cases, because one he liked. You're going to see that with respect to a whole array of courts up to and including the Supreme Court, the more that you see the Supreme Court saying, you know what, which we just saw, which is you violated due process. You have judges who said you violated the First Amendment. We have judges saying you violated the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, just on and on. And as Claire is totally right, these are judges who are appointed by Republican and Democratic presidents up to and including Donald Trump. There are recent decisions by Trump-appointed judges because they took an oath of office and they're applying the law. They're all in for it in the same way that you and I know very well is going to happen. And that is...
In for what? In for political attacks?
Exactly. You're going to have Congress saying this issue of packing the courts, limiting their jurisdiction, the efforts to impeach judges, that Judge Boasberg should be impeached. You had to have the Chief Justice of the United States say that's not how we behave in this country. That is going to be going on and on, where you have people at the White House up to and including the Attorney General of the United States saying these judges are siding with terrorists. And
by far has the bigger victory here. The reason for the challenge with those words is, I think what the court wants to be able to tell the government is, you have to go back and try with all of your effort to bring him back. He was wrongfully removed from this country. He belongs here. You have an obligation to go get him, so go get him. The effectuate part, they thought, perhaps was too broad because there's no guarantee that the United States will be successful. So if they were ordered to effectuate, for example, and El Salvador said no, would the U.S. government then be required to use military force to go get him back? And I think the answer to that would be no, because of the Constitution's role for the president in leading foreign policy, military matters, and the commander-in-chief, and national security matters. So facilitate means do everything you can to get him back. But of course, you can't control the actions of a foreign sovereign. And so we understand that you might not be able to make it happen.
And Julia, switching to the other case, the case of that Columbia grad student, he's a legal permanent resident. What's happening in court today?
Well, he's going before an immigration judge because he's been detained in Louisiana after he was arrested March 8th at Columbia University, where, as you said, he was a grad student and his U.S. citizen wife is just days away from giving birth to their first child. The immigration judge in this case has asked the United States to DHS to put forward evidence about why and on what grounds they want to deport him. He's a green card holder. And of course, you can't detain someone indefinitely if there's no case to deport him. So it's a matter of deportation versus release here. Rather than giving evidence about his ties to any kind of violent actors or anything he may have done, instead what they did was they put forward a 2-page memo from Secretary of State Marco Rubio that describes him and one other person whose name is redacted as having a presence in the United States that is somehow at odds with the interest of U.S. foreign policy. So that's not really going as far as providing evidence, merely saying this is the policy we are following. So we'll see what that immigration court judge has to say about that.
And so, Barbara, what legal authority or legal standing does the State Department have in expelling Khalil or anyone else who is either a visa stay or even a green card holder?
Well, one of the things that the Immigration and Nationality Act does, it does give the president great deference to administer our nation's immigration laws. And there's one provision in there that says if the Secretary of State makes a finding that there is a reasonable basis to believe that a person poses a significant threat to the foreign policy of the United States and they are a non-citizen, then the Secretary of State may designate that person for removal. Now, that doesn't give them carte blanche because the person is still entitled to due process under the Fifth Amendment, which typically means notice and an opportunity to be heard, which had not happened to date. But it also means when reviewing an agency decision through a case called Matthews versus Eldridge, that a court will consider the interests of the government, the interests of the person, and the process and the risks of whether that process is going to violate the rights of the individual. So I imagine the court will apply that standard. It's a bit of a balancing test to decide whether this is legitimate or whether it is pretextual. Just saying that this is harming our ability to fight anti-Semitism around the world, I think you've got to find more specifically about what it is he said or did that caused Marco Rubio to reach that conclusion. And to date, we've heard really just sort of that blanket allegation without any facts to support it. So I imagine that's what will be at issue at the hearing.
And Julia, President Trump yesterday during that cabinet meeting that was televised talked about undocumented farm and hotel workers leaving the U.S. and then coming right back in legally. What is that all about? Is there policy here?
You know what? The only comments that I can think of that it echoes, because we haven't seen a new policy come out on this, is it's similar to what Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has said when she's been asking immigrants across the country to self-deport and then get in line to come back in. But the key details they're leaving out is that sometimes it could take more than a decade to be able to come back in. There's oftentimes a waiting period, especially if you were found to have been in the country illegally. And then there's a tough process to climb through. You've got to go in for a health check. You have to be able to apply. There's a long line for people to come through, and it's made longer if you've had any period where you were in the United States illegally. And so this idea about being able to come right back and continue working really lacks a lot of context.
Joining us once again is former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder. Mr. Attorney General, thank you so much for being here again. Last night, President Trump ordered the Justice Department, in a bizarre executive order, he ordered DOJ to investigate two named people who served in his administration during his first term in office. Each of them had criticized or contradicted him publicly. This is one of the anti-democratic bright red lines that I've been waiting for the Trump administration to cross. The president ordering his prosecutors to go after named people who displease him. Like, we're there. What do you think the response should be now that this has happened?
Well, in some ways, this is the most disturbing of the executive orders that he has signed. Everybody needs to understand executive orders do not have the power of law, and yet they can move parts of the executive branch. I would hope that lawyers, I assume that they have lawyers, will be as creative and as aggressive as they possibly can to forestall any investigation that might be taken. That might be a difficult thing to do. I'll have to look actually at what the terms are of the executive order. It may state a reason. I have not seen it. It may state a specific reason. He's not been shy in putting into his executive orders exactly why he is ordering these things. And if he's ordering that it be done because they were, in essence, critics of the policies that he had in place in his first administration, that might serve as a basis for trying to forestall any
mistakes when it comes to Trump are right-wingers thinking I'm the exception. And that's everybody from regular Trump voters to other powerful people. People thinking he doesn't want to deport me, or he doesn't want to deport my undocumented family member, my undocumented spouse, my undocumented children, whatever. We're the good ones. He doesn't want to do anything to us. He only wants to get the bad guys. Or a Trump voter thinking he doesn't want to fire me as a public servant. He only wants to fire the useless ones. And we're also seeing with powerful people. Even Clarence Thomas. Trump is pissed at all 9 judges, including his favorite judges. And as noted, he's been going after judges, and it's not going to stop at the lower courts. Trump will, and indeed already has started to, twist the screws on every judge even daring to stand against him. And if you're a conservative judge and you think, well, I'm good with Trump, I vote with him, or I, give him 90% of the cases he wants. I give him the rulings 90% of the time. Trump sees that as 0% loyalty. Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, the 3 conservatives he put on the court especially, they need to realize they're not safe. Under fascism, the circle gets smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually everybody but Donald will have everything to lose.